Welcome to Northwest Aerospace News Live. I am Jennifer Ferrero, a writer for the magazine and your host. In today's episode, we are talking with Jim Lee, General Manager of Tool Gauge. They manufacture metal and plastic aerospace assemblies out of their factory in Tacoma. Let's welcome today's guest, Jim. Welcome.
Hi, Jennifer. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Jim. Well, we're glad to have you on the show today, and you've been profiled in Northwest Aerospace News magazine in the past, and your company is involved in the regional aerospace community. Jim, I'd like to know more about your affiliations. Please tell me about trade organizations you engage with and the benefit of being involved with them for your business.
Sure. Be happy to. We work with a number of different trade organizations, and I'll name the ones that come to mind first, which is probably the one that's been at the top of the list would be the Washington Department of Commerce, and they help us with building our export business in trade shows across the world. We've been to China with them, Japan, but the one that we most often attend is the Aircraft Interiors Exposition in Hamburg. That's all facilitated by the Washington Department of Commerce. And then more locally, we're members of, and I happen to be a board member of, the PNAA, which is the Pacific Northwest Aerospace Alliance. And that's a very large group of aerospace manufacturing companies, and we work together to share best practices in the industry. In the past, we've been members of the French American Chamber of Commerce, the British American Business Council, and a few other trade associations as well.
On your website, products are categorized by plastic parts and assemblies, and metal parts and assemblies. Let's start with plastic parts. Where would we find them on an aircraft, and what's important to your customers about how they're made?
Well, our parts are primarily, on the plastic side, are primarily interior parts. And you can see the background I have here is kind of representative of some of the stuff that we manufacture. So air system parts, bin trims, all kinds of closeouts around the bins, ceiling panels, notably along the bottom over here are decompression grills that we produce as well. So those are all parts that you can see when you get on the airplane, but we make two types of plastic parts. Parts that are cosmetic that you see when you get on the plane, and then stuff that you can't see that's typically structural. So class 1 would be the cosmetic parts, and then class 2 are the critical to flight parts that hold very important systems together. Those you can't see. Those are in the wing. They hold conduits and fuel lines and things like that, or landing gear components or flight deck components, such as some of the flap knobs that you see in the cockpit as you enter the airplane.
Well, it sounds like those are really important parts. The one question I always have when I'm on an airplane is, will those bins ever get bigger? Because luggage seems to be getting larger and people are cramming their luggage in there. Well, let's take a minute and talk about your metal parts and assemblies. What metal parts do you make on commercial aircraft, and what's important about the manufacturing process for those parts?
Yeah, so in our metal division, which is right across the street from where I'm sitting, we produce, most of what we produce there are spare components for the aftermarket. Those are airplanes that are typically no longer in service, or the part that was produced in production is no longer available. So we produce those parts. And because they're metal, obviously they would be, more structurally important. And the pieces that we produce are generally found around landing gear components, engine attachment features, and then inside the wing, flap tracks. So those are very big structural parts. And really, our metal parts are all over the airplane as well, but typically in very critical, high mechanical requirement places on the airplane.
Jim, as a follow-up question to that, it sounds like you produce a lot of parts for aircraft. About how many employees do you have in your business right now?
Yeah, we've had more employees than we have now, but currently we're around 160 employees. And as we look forward into the recovery of the aerospace industry and concurrent aircraft rate ups, we expect to go back over 200 within the next 18 to 24 months.
Okay. Well, in the past, we've discussed how Tool Gauge has implemented automation into the factory. What types of automation are you using, and what are some of the results that you've seen?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite subjects. So the building that we're in now is a building that we developed and designed around the concept of implementing automation. And we have automation currently in two of the three areas that we intend to utilize it at full rate production. So on our injection molding machines, the parts that produce the plastics, we have pickers and robots there that can take the part out of the machine and keep the people from reaching into really hot machines and pulling parts out, which is a safety issue, but it's also very efficient to utilize the robots for that. And then the second type of robot we use are universal cobots. And those are robots that help us eliminate the need for repetitive motion work, typically in assembly. So where we've had great success with cobots is implementing those into doing complex assemblies around applying glue to very tricky areas on aerospace components. And one example of a cobot ROI that we did was we developed a robot process for assembling an air nozzle that prior to the automation initiative, we had 4 employees full-time working on this assembly, producing about 100 parts per day. Once we proved out the robot and the concept for the glue application and assembly, we used 1 employee to produce 400 parts per day. So that was a really successful implementation of automation. The next stage of our automation is using mobile industrial robots within our factory. We have a very long factory. There's a lot of materials that move around and a lot of stuff that goes from inventory out to get some work done, then back in inventory, then back out to the plant. So we have a great potential, and the plant's laid out very well to introduce mobile industrial robots to help us move those materials around. We also plan to use mobile industrial robots as we bring our paint systems online, so we can get away from a stable or from a static moving line where you're putting parts on a hanger and they pass by the painter, to having a mobile industrial robot pull those parts in and then deliver those within very specific time intervals to the painting operation. So, and we can use those same exact robots for a number of other things within the factory. So it's a really great ROI on a very accessible and easy to understand and implement technology.
Jim, as a follow-up to that question regarding robots and automation, I know that sometimes people are fearful of that, but it sounds like you've implemented that successfully. I guess my question is, how does that change the training process in your factory when you hire new people? Do they have to be sort of robot savvy or understand the technology when you hire them?
Well, there's a whole interesting story around that, Jennifer. We brought in the 2 cobots initially as a pilot program, and we were obviously concerned that people might see them as a threat to their jobs, but they quickly understood by working in sequence with the robots, that they're actually making their work more enjoyable. And so it's less repetitive motion, very uninteresting work. And now they're working with a robot, and the robot kind of helps pace them. And it's sort of interesting because the robots were actually very well received, to the point where our employees named the robots. And so working with these robots is really straightforward. The interface, although it can be somewhat complex, is really just a fancy iPad. So getting people to understand how to program the robots, work with the robots, and the robots are very deferential to humans. So if you touch the cobot, it slows down or stops. So they're not dangerous. They don't look scary. They're quiet, and they're not intrusive, so you can have a conversation with somebody and it's not distracting. So we've had really good, actually well beyond our expectations of implementation for the robots.
Well, thank you for indulging me with that question.
Sure.
I'm going to switch gears just a little bit and ask you, as a regional manufacturer, how important is diversification of customers by industry?
Well, that's a good question. So we are an aerospace company, and at times we've said, should we be doing something outside of aerospace? But we kept coming back to the thing that we knew best, that we did the best. And so we are 100% aerospace, and we remain 100% aerospace. But that doesn't mean that we only have one customer. We work with Boeing as our number 1 customer, but because Boeing works with hundreds and hundreds of tier 1 integrators all over the globe. We actually work with those tier one integrators. So it's quite a diverse range of aerospace customers. We do continue to evaluate aerospace adjacent businesses like the space community here in the Pacific Northwest, which is really growing fast and thriving. The same requirements that we have for aerospace, we see coming forward through the space industry as well. So I think those are ones that are really simple to understand. The same goes for some of the defense markets. They have the same requirements in terms of how you operate your business and train your people, and certifications and all of that. So that's the beauty of aerospace, is that it does have some really attractive adjacent markets as well. And we work in those and continue to develop all of those markets.
It looks like your company is hiring and you have about a dozen positions posted on your website. How have you addressed the workforce shortage at Tool Gauge, and how do you keep your employees engaged?
Right. That's a really good question. And I got to say, maybe 18 months or 2 years ago, it was a very, very difficult challenge. I've often shared the story that our approach to finding and bringing in talent has been flipped over, 180 degrees. It seems like nowadays, most of the time, we're being interviewed by the potential employee, as much as we do the interview. And we're very aggressive on follow-up with candidates that we bring in to interview. We've reached out to a number of different markets. So, if we're looking for entry-level labor, we've engaged heavily with local internship programs such as AJAC. So we work with them very, very closely. We work with a number of local technical colleges as well to onboard students directly out of there. And then, of course, we have just people that come in off the street that would like to be trained. So we've set up a culture based on value, meaning if you come in the door and we start you off at an entry-level wage where you don't really have any skills or training, we'll lay out a pathway of jobs that you can qualify for based upon training and time in service in specific slots throughout the organization. And I can tell you of a number of cases where we hired someone to come in off the street. They ran a press, or then they got into an internship program through AJAC to become a CNC machinist, or they got into the warehouse operations and then started working in our outsource area for outside services that we do, and then bring those same people into the supply chain as a junior buyer and then a buyer. And our supply chain manager followed that exact same path. She came in, she was operating a press, and now she's our supply chain manager with a team of procurement people underneath her. So it's really, the sky's the limit at Tool Gauge, which is appropriate since we're an aerospace manufacturer. But we really do believe in promote from within, give people a map of how to get from where they are to get to where they'd like to be, and really help them succeed to do that. And that's really the basis of our workforce development, along with about 1,000 other things.
Well, that sounds great, Jim. I can actually start on Monday. I'll be right over.
There you go.
Well, you have a beautiful facility there. I love hearing about the automation and the things that you're doing with your employees. So thank you so much for coming onto the show today.
Oh, my pleasure. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share our story.
Great. All right. Well, if you're interested in learning more about Tool Gauge, check out toolgauge.net. And until next time, keep on engaging with the manufacturing and aerospace news you need to know in the Northwest with Northwest Aerospace News Magazine. Goodbye.